My name is Bill Mousoulis, and I, together with Chris Luscri, we run this series of screenings called Unknown Pleasures. And so this film is part of this series, Unknown Pleasures, where basically we screen alternative Australian films or unrecognised ones, independent ones pretty much. And so, yeah, thanks for coming, and thanks to the venue for allowing us to screen these kind of films. And a thank you also to the traditional owners of this land who somehow allow us to live, work and play here after 250 years of abuse against them. My respects to the Wurundjeri elders and my love and solidarity with all Indigenous people, including worldwide, especially the Palestinians in Gaza who are suffering great tragedy at the moment. So you know what you're here for. It's not you haven't just walked into the cinema randomly. So Pure Shit is one of those extraordinary films in the history of Australian film. Very much a wild film, but with its kind of serious side. It's a strange kind of complex film. It's like quite a hard-hitting, realistic, like heroin kind of drama in a way, but it's also like a comedy, like a caper film. I mean, a kind of black comedy, obviously. So that incredible mix is something to behold. And at the time in Australia, like that's 50 years ago, obviously, we've got a 50th anniversary here. So at the time in 1975, the Australian film industry was, still finding its feet, and there were quite a few crazy independent filmmakers at the time making really kind of odd films, and there were like, these bawdy comedies, Alvin Purple and whatever. And then, drum roll, along comes Picnic at Hanging Rock and kind of obliterates all of those kind of films, and that's the road that Australian cinema goes down. So, of course, there's always a place for the underground, the more kind of punk cinema of Australia, even if the place is kind of in the margins. But then someone like Richard Lowenstein had a bit of success with Dogs in Space in 1986, which is very much influenced by this film. So at the end, we've actually got the producer of the film here, Bob Weis. The director, Bert Deling, passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 80. So Bob will be interviewed. There'll be a Q&A, which will be moderated by Adrian Danks, who's from RMIT in the Melbourne Cinematheque. So it's a short film. It's about 75 minutes or so. And so I think you'll enjoy it. And a content warning, obviously. There's actually graphic depiction of intravenous kind of drug use. And if you're kind of sensitive to things like overdoses and whatever, just a warning. But I think you guys all know that anyway. So it's a wild ride. Enjoy.
Wow, it was great seeing that again, Bob.
Well, 50 years later, I'm just seeing things that I can't remember at all. Yeah, it was great to see it again.
Well, hopefully the questions I'll ask you'll be able to answer. Let's hope so. I guess just as a starting point, because who's seen the film before? Quite a few, but quite a few haven't seen the film before, which is good to see, actually. How did the film come about?
Well, that's a very, very general question.
It is.
I'll tell you more about the process if you like.
Yeah. Well, I guess what was the gestation of the film? I mean, how did it end up sort of going into production?
Well, that's about 7 questions. Sorry, I'm just.
It's all right, Bob. It's okay.
It's pedantic. Bert had made a film called Dalmas, and I'd made a film called Children of the Moon. Both were kind of, very much first films. And we lived near each other in the country. I had a place in Merricks North, and he had a place in Baxter. And he was just saying, look, I've got this idea, and we started talking, and, you know, he got involved with June from the Buoyancy Foundation, and we put together a small group of mainly junkies, actually.
Yeah, and I assume there were people, also actors from the Pram Factory and...
They came in later,
Yeah.
but the core group were, I was just looking at the film, I mean, probably at least a third of them are dead now.
Yeah.
Most of them from use. Of the four main actors, Anne Hetherington, I understand is now, I'm not in touch with her, but I understand is living in London. Her partner at the time was Paul Dixon, who was on the soundtrack. He was a sax player and had a band. He died a while ago. Phil Motherwell, who was the cocaine freak in the big house. He died maybe last year or the year before. So yeah, I mean, watching it now, it's just looking at a lot of people that I knew and worked with who are no longer with us.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens when you see a film probably 50 years later.
Oh, that's right.
Particularly a film like this,
Yeah.
actually. So you were mentioning, I mean, it's a question I think everyone would probably ask when they're watching the film. Obviously, it's a film that was partly sponsored by the Buoyancy Foundation.
Buoyancy put up some initial, I think 10,000 of the initial seed capital. The whole film, and it's hard to wrap your head around at this time, or in these days, the whole film was made for 34,000. And none of us got, I think we took $50 a week.
Yeah, I'm assuming there weren't large profits that came out of that, or
No.
So the Buoyancy Foundation, we should tell everyone who they actually were.
Well, they were a foundation that dealt with people who had drug problems, and offered help and solutions.
Yeah, and they were set up in 1967 or something like
I'm
that.
not sure when they were set up, but they were completely non-judgmental about it. It wasn't like, you're a terrible junkie and you got a problem. You could either be locked up or we'd look after you, like the Max Gillies character in the end. They were very early adopters of a completely different approach that supported people rather than blamed them.
And the film was part of that.
The film was meant to be part of that.
Did they end up using it?
Oh, it took on a life of its own. I think they promoted it to their constituencies. But I mean, it had a terrible distribution record. It's probably been seen by a lot more people in the last 30 years than saw it in the first 20 years.
Yeah, and since it had a DVD release in about 2009, 2010, which gave it I guess a newer life in some ways again too.
Yeah. That was beyond video.
Yeah, absolutely, because it didn't have much play at that point in time on video. So maybe we could talk a little bit about, you just mentioned the release of the film, so just talk a little bit about that and what was the fate of the film at the time, because of course it was quite a notorious film when it was made.
Well, just to give you an idea of how notorious it was, I think the man's name was Andrew Mackay, who was a critic for the Herald. And in true Herald style, he had a headline saying, "The most evil film I've ever seen." And then I can't remember the content of the so-called critique, but I said to Bert, "Let's use it, put it on the poster." And in fact, we did. He said, "Pure S ... the most evil film I've ever seen, Andrew Mackay, the Herald." It got released initially, we self-distributed because none of the distributors would touch it. At what was then a theatre called the Playbox in Russell Street, I think.
Yeah.
I think in Russell Street, yeah. And it had not a raging success. As I said, the film has become more significant in people's minds as time goes on. And as I said to my goddaughter this morning, I just let her know, too late obviously, that the film was on tonight and it was the 50th anniversary, and she said, I can't go, I'm at uni, and you know, I said, don't worry, another 50 years there'll be another one.
Well, it's actually going to be on in November, so she'll have an opportunity to see it actually then.
Well, let me know in good time.
I will, Bob. I mean, it's fascinating in terms of when the film was released, because obviously it was a film that was released in 1975. 1975 is often now talked about as a kind of pivotal year in Australian film. And the film actually, I think, was first screened at the Perth Film Festival, the short-run Perth Film Festival, about, I think, a week before Picnic Hanging Rock was first screened.
Right.
So the Australian cinema could have taken a different direction, perhaps, if it had gone more down this route than the route of Picnic Hanging Rock, and certainly with the funding bodies, etc.
I think in many ways I don't want to say the example that we gave, because we were just one of a number of people in the community making what would today be thought of as experimental cinema. But that's been alive since then, I think, and as I say, we weren't the only ones. There was Body Melt, the Philip Brophy
quite
film.
a bit later in the early 90s,
Yeah. But yeah, look, you know, I'm happy to be part of a pioneering effort.
Well, it seems to be, looking at the film and looking at its history, I mean, you could see it as a kind of a first film, but it's also almost a last film of a particular movement, which is that movement of poor or Carlton cinema of the 60s into the 1970s.
Yeah. Yeah, yes and no. I think there have been, along the way, other filmmakers that not taking us as an example, but experimenting with form and with style and content and so on, and different ways to come up with a final thing. I mean, people working with improvisation and with, you know, both improvisation of camera and design and style, as well as dialogue and the rest.
Yeah, I mean, this film has an extraordinary kind of varied style in a way. There's that fantastic sequence at the in the car wash. It kind of comes out of nowhere, almost, except it kind of doesn't, because the film has moments like that.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that scene. I mean, it has no logic whatsoever. I mean, you look at it and think, what the, you know, and in fact, it's just a segue into anarchy.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking a little bit about the kind of visual style of the film, but also the improvisation. So I think anyone who watches this film would kind of wonder how much of the film itself was improvised, how much was scripted, how much was workshopped, and also how much the film, kind of, they're all related questions, but it is a collaborative work.
Well, that's a good place to start, actually. The whole idea of the film at the very beginning was it's a collaboration between people actually in the addict community and drug takers, with so-called professional filmmakers, and some of the actors, for instance, that you saw, like Carol Porter, Wilfred Last. Just trying to think of which others. John Laurie was in between. He used a bit, and but had more of a background as a musician and writer than as an actor. I don't think he went on to do any acting afterwards, and he was one of the four key characters. But I mean, what I'm totally struck by, and it's got nothing to do with the question you just asked, is that as I was watching, I was thinking, he's dead, she's dead, they're dead. Oh, there's another one. Wonder if they're alive. I had a conversation with Shovers, James Williamson, over a period of 2 or 3 months by text, because he lives in Hobart. And I just think of somebody and I'd send him a text and say, just the name, and he'd say dead.
Yeah.
So it's not a lifestyle that you want to take on if you've got things to do in the future.
No, I think the film gets a pretty good sense of that, while also not being just a cautionary tale at the same time.
Oh, there was no morality. Look, the moral viewpoint that we took, and you've got to go back to the time it was made, 75, we thought we were changing the world. And the world we wanted to change, it's a little bit planted into the scenes with Max Gilly's character, the psychiatrist at the end. We wanted to decriminalise drugs. And there's just a massive percentage of people in America that are in private prisons for 2 ounces of marijuana, let alone speed and cocaine and heroin, and now fentanyl, of course. But we wanted to say, look, this is a medical problem, it's a psychiatric and psychological problem, but as soon as you criminalise it, you just make it worse and not better. That's not the outcome I hope that as a society we're looking for. Just as a quick straw poll, how many people in this room have injected a drug? Thank you. How many people in this room have smoked a drug? How many people in this room have snorted a drug? Right. Now, we were videoing the responses, and the police will be here in a minute.
They're going to crash through the door like in the movie.
And there's a bus outside to take you in. I mean, is that real? Does that feel like a real society response to you? Nobody's answering.
I have a question though.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, please ask the question.
In what sense was it like? Did you feel like you were making an anti-drug movie? You know,
No.
because you had that funding from Buoyancy, was there a sense that you were trying to dissuade people from taking drugs?
No. No. In fact, Buoyancy were amazing because once they'd set the thing in motion, they didn't want any censorship or even overview of what was happening. And as I say, those are the days where we're all taking speed or LSD and certainly marijuana, mushrooms, and we had no moral qualms about people. I mean, I had a friend who came back from India and he said, man, because we were smoking dope, and he said, you haven't lived until you tried heroin. And he was sitting there rubbing his eyes and nodding off. And I said, do you feel good? And he said, it's just fantastic. And I thought, well, I didn't say it to him at the time because it was pointless, but if what you're doing is making you feel good, I don't really want to go there.
So do you need people to have mics, Bill?
Yeah, possibly. Yep, I can pass the mic on.
Yeah.
Questions? So, Kevin.
Then there's a question up there.
Bob, we know that the film was shown at Perth. Was it shown at any other Australian or overseas film festival? Did you get any release anywhere for it?
You mean other than Perth?
Did MIF show it?
Sorry?
Did Melbourne show it?
No.
I don't think so, no. No, the film was, I don't want to use the word blackballed, but it didn't get a run or a good reception from the press, from the mainstream distributors. TV, cable haven't shown it.
Release it today, you'll make a fortune.
From your lips to God's ear.
Oh, sorry, I'll do it. I mean, the film actually did get some positive reviews at the time, definitely, but obviously not all of them.
I must have missed him.
Certainly not in the Herald.
Got a question here.
Hi, Bob. Why was there no home video release in the 80s, and what kept it out of circulation for so long?
What kept it out of video in the 80s? There wasn't, well, I didn't push it, but there were no offers. I may well have broached the subject with somebody, but it was all no. What was the second part of the question?
Why was that in circulation for so long?
I'm not sure that it was out of circulation. I gave the internet to the Film and Sound Archive, and it was certainly accessible from there.
Yeah, there was a print available.
Yeah.
When did Cinematheque first show?
We've screened it quite a few times.
Yeah.
So,
I remember seeing
but-
it late 80s.
yeah, we
early
screened
90s.
it then. But the reality is, most of those films of this kind from that time were not very available. I mean, Yakety Yak wasn't very available. Queensland, which of course the film screened here, was not very available. I mean, most of those films kind of had a bit of a half-life, really, once you got to video.
This one in particular would have had a definite cult following in the 80s if it had actually been around.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that unfortunately, not much happened with most of that material from
Greg
that
Lynch
time.
would have taken it on.
We've got a question here from Julie.
Did David Stratton ever said?
Yes, and I don't know.
He does write about it in the last New Wave, so he definitely saw it.
And maybe his recent book?
Maybe.
I don't know.
Is he still alive?
Yes, he is still alive. Yeah, he's not very well, but
Okay.
You mentioned June in passing. I take it that's a reference to June Bryant, she had something to do with the Buoyancy Foundation. I take it?
She ran the Buoyancy Foundation.
And can you say a few words about her, or what her inspiration was? Or?
Oh, mate, it was 50 years ago. I can't remember what mine was. No, I'm sorry. All I remember was that she was very generous with us, put the seed funding in, and was hands off.
I mean, you also got money from the Australian Council too, didn't you? That film and television fund that was part of that at one point, I think.
Yeah, a little bit from them. Also, I'm kind of, shouldn't really say this now, but I had a friend who said, I'll put something in. And when I went to see her about this, she gave me 5 kilos of marijuana.
You got to do what you got to do.
Exactly, yeah.
It doesn't seem inappropriate. Probably.
That's right.
Got a question from Aaron here.
It's very much like a documentary or a docudrama. Why wasn't it a documentary? Like, why'd you make the decision to make it into like a narrative film rather than a documentary?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, while I was watching it, the intention was 24 hours in the life of a group of junkies searching for the next hit. And if you feel that it was documentary-like, then somehow we succeeded, I guess.
Well, the drug use, it's probably the most explicit that's been on film besides a Warhol movie or something, you know. I mean, I guess that's why I thought.
Yeah,
like
can I add something? I might just add.
Of course.
Yeah. I'm not saying this is the inspiration particularly for this film, but a lot of the other films we've kind of been mentioning that precede this film, made by the Melbourne University Film Society, like Nothing Like Experience, or the films like Brake Fluid, etc., they almost all have this hybrid documentary fiction quality to them. It has a lot to do with the very low budget nature of the filmmaking as well, so that you're kind of often working between those two modes. And Bert Deling very much comes out of that tradition. So he's a key figure in the Melbourne University Film Society in the 1960s. Less as a filmmaker at that point, but as a critic, actually, it's quite interestingly. So I think there's a continuity. Even a film like Yakety Yak has elements of that, even though it's a really absurdist film. It does draw on, people in the street and various other things too. So I think it's really a kind of a particular mode or a wave of filmmaking, and particularly in Melbourne around this time, which this film I think picks up on at some level in its own way. It's also unique too.
Kim Miles here.
Hi. A real experience that was. I've got a couple of quick questions, but I mean, I'm as a surrealist, I'm thinking surrealism, and also the dialogue, because I'm more of a visual person than sort of dialogue, and I found that you didn't really even have to listen to the dialogue. You kind of experienced it without sort of taking it all on board. The other thing about the senses, like, did it have to go up? I don't know. I wasn't around. Well, I was very young back in those days. But does the film have to go up to the senses as far as the drug taking and all that? Did it go up to the board? Did they have the censored board back then?
Yeah.
I think all films to get released had
So
to, and possibly still have to go through.
And did
It's
this?
a slightly different process.
Oh yeah.
And so because wouldn't they try and blur or cut the drug taking scenes? Wouldn't they say you can't have them in?
Well, they didn't. Well, first of all, they said the title couldn't be used.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And look, I think if they could have banned the whole thing, they probably would have.
I remember you saying in an interview how you wanted to do a fast edit,
Right.
which I noticed is kind of interesting because heroin's a really slow drug that slows you down. So
Yeah,
it's kind of
speed and cocaine.
And I think it's got legs, this film. Sorry, Bill. It's sort of almost a metaphor for the madness that's going on in society today. Not so much drugs, but just that sort of thing about working yourself to death and consumption and buying and spending. I mean, I see life as just as crazy now as it is. And the final thing is the car chases. Is that like Mad Max sort of just hanging out a car with a camera and not getting permission to do anything, just letting it rip?
We don't have time for that. And all of it was shot for real. Just to your point about the dialogue, Bert showed everybody the Howard Hawks film, His Girl Friday, where everybody's talking over each other and at a rapid pace, and said, that's what I want.
Screwball comedy.
Yeah.
Speedball, this one. John Hughes.
Just on the question that was raised about the documentary dimension of the film, it reminded me that there was a film made with the Buoyancy Foundation, a cinema verite film, in about 1972 called Nowhere Game, which articulated that editorial idea that was driving buoyancy. It just reminded me one of the interesting things about buoyancy was it adopted certain countercultural practices in the way it operated its services, to the extent that it invited its clients to participate in the administrative practices of the place. So that was one of the things that was going on in that early 70s countercultural milieu, was to bring people in and empower them to deal with things in cooperative, organised manner. And buoyancy did that, as well as, of course, advocating the harm minimalisation policies and arguing against the criminalisation of drugs, which that film Nowhere Game also articulated at that time, which you have to understand in that context. The entire discourse was to do with the criminalisation of people's practice. Sorry, I've spoken too much.
Is that you,
You've
John?
never spoken
John
too much,
Hughes?
John.
Okay. John is an amazing scholar and reader of the text of films and explainer. Often explains things to me about my films, and I really appreciate your input. Thanks, John.
Another question?
July, I've got I might ask a question. Just related to the one thing we haven't really talked about is the representation of Melbourne in the film. And it's kind of fascinating because comparing it to other films like, say, this particular mic's a bit live. It's Queensland, for example. Although there are moments where you can, I mean, I was pretty young when this film was made, so I don't remember that moment. But I think it's probably hard to identify a lot of Melbourne from the film. I mean, you get, obviously there's the Professor Longhair's record store, which then kind of joins up to become Readings. So it's Lygon Street, quite a bit of it. But
not really.
Yeah, not much.
No.
So, and that's kind of a fascinating element of the film. It's like you're very much caught within, I think Susan Germany called it a trapped city film. So you kind of feel like it could almost be anywhere, while it's also distinctively Melbourne at the same time.
Is there a question in that?
Yeah, I guess the question really is about, was that a conscious decision to film Melbourne in that way?
I guess the conscious decision was we lived in Melbourne, we loved Melbourne. A lot of the locations that I saw tonight just brought a lot of things back that are rooted in Melbourne, no pun intended. And yeah, I mean, the first chemist bust was done at Queen Vic Market, and there was a friend of mine who owned that chemist shop. He's since passed away, Mal Morgan. The second chemist bust was on corner of Glenira and Hotham Street, I believe. But you know, I can look at the film and just it brought back to me all the locations. There's the scrungy house they all lived in Greville Street, which has since been majorly redeveloped. And the guy who owned that and redeveloped it, that was the house that Phil Motherwell, and I've forgotten Alison Hill, his crazy partner, lived in. That was his house as well. Okay. And that was in Oran Crescent. But yeah, we make films about what we know, and we do it hopefully with a bit of caring and love, because that's where we live.
Leo?
Just what are your strongest memories of Bert personally, and was there ever any discussion of working together again on another project?
The short answer to that end of the question is no. We had a pretty bad falling out in the process of making the film. I said in an interview last week, I think, that Bert at his best was generous, warm, open, friendly, engaging. But I'll give you the, in my mind, the perfect example. That film you just saw had credits. The film on release had no credits. And he just said, credits are bourgeois and bullshit. So the film became Bert Deling's pure shit, which he had no problem with. We didn't agree on a number of things. I'll tell you a story quickly. That scene, the first chemist bust where they pry open the tin on the roof, this will give you an example of how we work together. We shot it over 2 different nights. On the first night we did the exterior with the guy and the 3 of them on the roof, and he's prying the tin off, and then he disappears, presumably jumps through. And the second week we were supposed to shoot the interior with the guy jumping down and then them doing the bust there. Unfortunately, in the intervening week, the guy did a real chemist bust and was in jail. So we're on set, and Deling turns to me and says, where is, I've forgotten his name. I said, well, he's not here. And he said, well, where the fuck is he? I said, he's in jail. And he said, this is your fault, Weis. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you know, we've shot half the scene, now we're buggered. So I took him aside and I said, listen, we've seen him and established him on the roof, pulling the tin off and jumping in. And what we can do is just go to the interior, where we are tonight, and see a body dressed like him flashing through frame. He's not a main character. I can't even remember who he was. And I didn't say that, but I can't remember now who he was. And then we follow our key leads. So in front of everybody, he says, Weis, absolute rubbish. Sorry, I've taken him aside to do this. He said, that won't work, let me think about it. So then in front of the crew, he says, Weis, your idea was rubbish, but I know exactly what we can do. I said, good, what can we do? This is a point about being a producer as well. He said, well, we've established the guy on the roof. All we need to do now is dress somebody as his double, see him flash through frame, it'll take half a second, and then we follow our heroes. That'll work, and your stupid idea would never have worked. And I said, I bit my tongue and I said, that's brilliant. But that's absolutely, you've solved it. That's fantastic. And that's what we did.
Crazy filmmaking, yeah. Any more questions? Maybe a couple more we've got time for. No? Yep.
One quick one.
The guy with the sunglasses. What was his name? The actor who he wore sunglasses and he just didn't stop talking.
Gary Waddell.
Yep.
Gary
Waddell.
Waddell. So
his name in the film was Lou.
Lou. Yeah, that's right, Lou. I mean, was he just making up that dialogue, or was any of it scripted?
Some of it was scripted, but you know, he was talking at 1,000,000 to 1. So
was he on drugs while you were shooting?
Yes.
Right.
Well, all the drug taking you saw was actual real time.
So when people were shooting up heroin, they were actually shooting up heroin?
They were shooting up some white powder, yeah.
Oh, okay.
They never knew what it was.
Thank you. It was an amazing film.
You didn't really want to know what it was.
One of the main characters, Carol, yeah, she was from the pram factory,
Yes.
and she was scared of the needles and everything. But also with Gary Waddell, that actor, he went on to have a really good career as an actor. You know, he was in a couple of more indie kind of films in the 70s.
He's still around too.
He's still around, but actually, Bob, he nearly died recently, so he'll be next.
Yeah, so Gary
he was in hospital badly.
Yeah.
He lives in Adelaide.
Very recently.
Gary Waddell, that was his first performance, but yeah, he's done a lot of good work. He was in a Rolf de Heer film as well.
He'd done a bit of theatre work before that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And
he's still alive, but
had been
it's just
around
natural.
the pram factory.
How much of Helen Garner's speech was scripted?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because somebody put the question to me last week and said, in their understanding, every word in the film was written. To which I used an old Greek expression, bullshit. I mean, Helen, from my understanding, was given a 10-page script on the set.
Mm.
And she said, I'm never going to remember this. And Gary gave her some speed. And she just took off.
Yep.
But I'm sure she didn't remember 10 pages of dialogue.
But she's great.
Sorry?
She's great.
Oh, she's fantastic, yeah.
Maybe just one last question, if anyone's got a special one. No?
Or even a not so special one.
What about a really boring one?
How much of the budget was spent on Max Phillies?
He was probably paid $50.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He's in Dalmas as well, so that's probably, he had already had a connection to Bert through that.
And Greg Pickhaver.
Oh, 50 cents.
Yeah. When he was just on Triple R, I mean, he wasn't, when Triple R first started, he was on that, so he was just...
He wasn't HG then. What's really interesting is that I haven't heard anybody kind of work this out, but HG, Alan Garner, and he now calls himself HG.
HG,
yeah. But he was very fond of Helen in the old days.
Well,
good place to finish
I
on.
think we'll wrap it up there. So thank you, Bob, for your time coming down, and thanks, Adrian, and thanks all of you guys for coming along. So.
And a final shout out to Bill for the extraordinary work that he's doing and the program he's putting together.
Thanks, Bob.
Also, if anyone wants to go to Adelaide, they can see it again. And actually, if you missed it tonight,
yeah, I'm putting it on in Adelaide on April 26. And actually, I put it on about 7 years ago in Adelaide and in Melbourne. And Gary Waddell was part of the Q&A in Adelaide back in 2019, 6 years ago. But unfortunately, as I said a moment ago, he's been very ill lately, and I haven't heard back from him or his partner or anyone. So he probably won't be doing the Q&A with us.
Where in Adelaide?
It's going to be on at the Mercury Cinema on April 26, which is a Saturday night. Yeah.
When's it on at the Cinematheque, Adrian?
I think about the 20th of November, something like that. Can't remember the exact
Bill,
date.
can I just say one final thing?
Sure.
This is back to front, but I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And
Absolutely.
we're now on land that was stolen from them. It was never ceded. And we look to a time when we and they can hold hands and walk with our heads high.
You said it, brother. How the referendum vote got a no is one of the great tragedies of Australia recently, I think. Anyway, yeah.
Peter Dutton's going to get a no in a couple of weeks.
Let's hope.
Well, that'll be some. Let's hope so.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, mate. That was great.
Yeah,
I really,
thanks.
really enjoyed watching the film.